Welcome to the fourth and final episode of our European holiday series. Leaving Reykjavík, we took the Highland Bus to the start of the Laugavegur Trail in Landmannalaugar. We arrived at around 11 a.m. and had an ambitious goal to hike the 24 kilometers to the second hut where we would set up camp. The weather mostly stayed in our favour and we were able to hike at a decent pace. Because we were hiking during the opening week of the season, there was still a lot of snow on the ground. For the slightly less coordinated member of the group, this made for some slippery walking at times. We took a brief snack break at the first hut and then kept moving on. It started to drizzle just as we reached the final peak before descending into camp, which made the hike down the mountain feel quite precarious at times. We were so thankful to arrive at the campsite after a long day of hiking and to have the sun come out as well. Today's hike was a long stretch of barren lava field, so we were grateful there was no wind, as we had heard that you can get sandblasted through this section. The mountains just seemed to pop up out of nothing, and the views made up for the straight and flat walking. We arrived at the next hut and set up our tent next to a stream. The day started off with a beautiful ravine crossing, followed by more lava field terrain. We would then start ascending back up another mountain, and we paused to admire the views from the top. The rest of the day would be punctuated by the ups and downs of ravine and mountain crossings and a long walk through a dry riverbed. We arrived into Thórsmörk, but our final destination was still another 1.5 kilometers away at the volcano huts. This would mark the official end of the Laugavegur section of our journey. We made a cheeky inquiry over breakfast if there was a transfer service that could take us to the next trailhead, and while there isn't an official service, what followed was probably the best $63 we spent in Iceland. We were looking forward to seeing the world's newest mountains created in 2010. However, as we were later told by the hut warden, the weather system between two glaciers is extremely volatile, and it felt like we were transported into a black and white alternate universe. At times we could barely see, stopping only to figure out where the next trail marker was. As basic as the Baldvinskali hut is, I have never been more grateful to see a hut in my life. Today was our final day of hiking, as we would complete our walk into Skógar following a trail that is known as the Waterfall Way. We lost count of the number of waterfalls we passed, but suffice to say it definitely lived up to its reputation. It was quite jarring returning back to civilization and the tourist crowds after 5 days in the Highlands. The mighty falls of Skógafoss marked the official end of the trail and the unofficial end of our time here in Europe.